Our next presenter is known to many of us. This is the only one of our 6 presenters this morning we've drawn from within the field of opera, asking Matthew Schilbach, the Associate General Director of the San Francisco Opera, to come talk to us about their HD transmissions to the baseball park in San Francisco. It so happens that the baseball park is home to the current World Series champions. We have a limited tolerance for that show of enthusiasm, those of us from New York, so contain it, please. This is a fantastic program that serves the community, creates a really important civic gathering place through opera using electronic media and a very wonderful, thoughtful system about capturing contact information and moving people from the relational to the transactional contact with the opera company. As no secret, we're going to be in San Francisco next year for our annual conference, and we are hoping that the schedule plays out so that one of our nights there can be a night in that unnameable stadium watching one of these transmissions so that we can partake in the spirit and the experience of one of these fantastic transmissions. So without further ado, please welcome Matthew Schilbach.
Good morning. It's great to be with you today. I'd like to start with an image, and I'd like to ask you to think about your reaction when you see this image. For those of you who know San Francisco, you'll know this is the War Memorial Opera House. Maybe you're thinking about the beautiful Beaux-Arts architecture, maybe the sweeping lobbies or the gilded amphitheater. Or maybe if you've worked there, you're thinking about the cramped backstage. Maybe you're thinking about a performance that had particular resonance to you that you saw last year, 5 years ago, 20 years ago. Hopefully you're thinking some good thoughts. Now think about what this image might mean to someone who had never set foot in the building, or for whom opera is a completely alien concept. Maybe they're still thinking about the beautiful architecture, but they're probably thinking it's also a pretty imposing, forbidding place. Maybe a place that's expensive and out of their league, or if they know a little bit about what happens inside, maybe something they can't even understand because it's in a foreign language. This dichotomy of how the public sees a building like this is not unique to San Francisco. It affects many of our companies and many of our cities. And what this conference really is about is how do we blow open the walls of a building like this and take opera out of our comfort zone and put it in the comfort zone of the general public. I'd like to now show you another image. This is 32,000 people enjoying a live simulcast of Aida from the same opera house in September 2010, relayed live to AT&T Park, the baseball stadium in San Francisco and the home of the San Francisco Giants. Here you still have all the trappings of grand opera. You've got a spectacle, you've got a communal shared experience and a shared emotional experience. And you've got larger-than-life images and sound. I'd like to take a little time and talk about how we got to an audience of this size and some of the imperatives for success that we found along the way. Simulcasts were no stranger to David Gockley, the General Director of San Francisco Opera. He had begun implementing them in the mid-90s in Houston, and when he got to San Francisco in 2006, he knew that he had to try them in the city as well. However, we had a big problem. There were no union agreements that would even make this possible. In fact, we didn't even have the union agreements to put a photo of an artist on the website, so strained with the media relations. So the first imperative was to lay the logistical foundation. For us, that meant a lot of union negotiations. We worked through that, and we put up the first simulcast in the spring of 2006, Madame Butterfly, not at the ballpark, but at Civic Center on the other side of City Hall, about a block from the Opera House. Almost overnight, this changed the public perception of San Francisco Opera. The next day, the entire front page of the arts section of the San Francisco Chronicle, plus a lot of the internal content, was given over to the simulcast. We also had a phone call the next day from KDFC, the classical radio station in San Francisco, to whom, before the simulcast, there would have been a sense that opera was just completely anathema to the general public. They wouldn't even play an aria on the radio station, let alone a full-length opera. KDFC quickly realized the power of opera in the local community and became one of our most trusted and powerful media partners, to the point where they now actually MC and host the simulcasts at the ballpark. So very quickly, the impact of the simulcast became apparent. But the simulcasts at the Civic Center were expensive. The rental of that big LED screen was very costly, And to turn a venue into an event space that had no event space attributes was also very costly. So in 2007, when we read that the San Francisco Giants were installing a 103-foot wide HD screen at the baseball park in advance of an All-Star game that year, we picked up the phone and suggested this rather wacky idea to them. They could not have been a more positive partner. The San Francisco Giants were really, I think, the first, if not one of the first, companies to really explore how to leverage their stadium outside of sports games and to really maximize the use of it in what we would call dark days. So they quickly got the benefit of this idea, and off we went. So I think the second imperative for us was to find an enthusiastic, non-arts partner that would allow us to reach that comfort zone of the general public. We couldn't do it ourselves. We had to find a partner like the Giants to do it. And quickly, the audience grew and grew and grew. The height was that AIDA in 2010 with 32,000 people, but I think our average is around 27,000 a year. You'll maybe ask about that dip in the penultimate point there. That was Turandot, so it wasn't the title, it was weather. And weather is the evil enemy of simulcasts, and occasionally it gets the better of us. So how did we achieve that kind of audience growth over just a few years? A lot of social media, a lot of word of mouth, a lot of sense that this was an important community civic event definitely helped. And that was driven to a huge degree by vigorous marketing. When other companies think about doing simulcasts, there are a number of other great examples out there in the US about simulcast activity. The first question we often get asked is, doesn't this destroy your single ticket sales for that show? Doesn't it cannibalize what you're doing in the Opera House? We have never once found that to be the case. And in fact, in San Francisco, from the start, we went out in a very, very aggressive way with big, bold marketing in very, very visible places. Bus shelters, sides of buses, pole banners, things that really gave a sense not only of the simulcast, but also of the opera's relationship to the community, and also, as a nice tangential benefit, to the title that's happening in the Opera House. So this marketing actually, to a degree, helps drive single ticket sales. And as we'll see a little later, we also then reach out to the attendees, and that also helps with single ticket sale marketing as well. So once we have this audience flowing in, what do we do with them? And this is the fourth and final imperative, and that is know your audience. When we went to the simulcast at the ballpark, we had to start thinking a little differently. It wasn't a public space where people could just fill in around the edges. This was a closed venue where we had to determine in advance the number of ushers, how many levels even of the baseball stadium we were going to open, how many concessions would be open, etc., etc. So we worked out with the Giants a very robust sign-up system, which is not required, but many people now do. And that gave us not only the attendance data, but we quickly realized it also gave us a great data set of who was signing up and then who was attending. And I'd like to spend a little time on some of the results we've seen since 2006. We pull all of this data into Tessitura, we analyze it, we look at who's new, who was already in our system, and what we found over the 6 years is 56,000 new households which are now in our database. That's 56,000 new households who have some proclivity for opera and were before completely off our radar screen. You can't buy a data set like that. That is just gold dust for our company. Because what we can now do is have a conversation with those people. We can encourage them to come to the opera. We can encourage them to come to an event like an open house or to a family event like the recent family show we did over in Berkeley. This is a real way for us to reach out into a very new public. The other big question we often get asked is, what does this mean at the box office? Do these people ever buy tickets? And again, over the course of 6 years, we've been able to pull together some interesting data. Let's go back to that first simulcast at the ballpark in 2007, Samson and Delilah. We see over year in, year out, those new people, so these are people who had never been in our system before, have purchased over $500,000 of tickets at the Opera House. That's over a 200% return on investment from what we put into the simulcast. And over the 6 years, we've now brought in over $1.8 million of ticket sales from those simulcasts. That's a fabulous number, and it's wonderful to be able to share that with you, because I think it speaks volumes not only to our simulcasts, but what we're all doing as companies doing outreach events. Some of them can't be measured as elegantly as this because they aren't enclosed venues, but I think it speaks to the power at the box office of what we're all doing in the communities. But for me, I go back to that 56,000 new households. That's where I think the real benefit is for us as a company, because we know within that group there are thousands of new households in San Francisco who no longer see this building as a fortress to which they can never gain access, but rather a place in which events like this happen on a very regular basis. And hopefully within that, we've gone some way to blowing open the walls of the Opera House. Thank you very much. Oh, sure.
Thank you, Matthew. It's just a great presentation. It's such a powerful illustration of your ability to achieve community impact and to create a business plan around it.
Mm-hmm.
Have you found that any of the households you've discovered through this have actually become contributors to the opera?
We have found that. It's early days yet. I'd say there's a modest and growing data set on that, which I can talk about with you later offline with the questions. But we're definitely seeing the beginnings of that, but it's slow going at the moment.
And then you did an open house in the Opera House
Mm-hmm.
this fall. And I think it was really quite targeted toward the new households from the baseball stadium. How did that go over?
This was an example of where that 56,000 new households really came into play, because we suddenly had 4,000 people coming into the Opera House, many of which for the first time, getting a more granular sense of what we do within inside that building. And that was a beautiful example of how that data set translates into further activity.
So 4,000 people were accepted your invitation to come to the open house.
4,000 came. We don't have the exact data yet, but we know that many of them came out of that Simulcast data set.
That's fantastic. Well, we really look forward to the possibility of seeing it next year.
Pray for the MLB schedule.
We'll pray for that, and thank you again so
Thanks
very much.